To help keep you oriented, that is, to show where I started out in this video series, and where I am now, and where I'm going, I'm just going to quickly show these slides again. I won't read them again, but they're here if anyone wants to pause and read them, which might be especially useful for anyone tuning into this series midstream. The sixth supernatural explanation for suffering is that the divine is not all-powerful. And this is something that we'll hear from believers in polytheistic religions, and maybe sometimes from certain deists and certain New Agers. It's not something we usually find from Jews or from Christians or Muslims. So I was a bit surprised when I first discovered that this was the idea behind the famous book by Rabbi Harold Kushner called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Now, I've met a lot of people who have recommended this book to me as a great one to make sense of suffering. And the back cover advertises this purpose. It reads, for anyone who has ever been hurt in life. We can see at the bottom it says, the best seller that has brought peace to millions. So because this book is so famous, I'm going to use it as my focal point to discuss this idea about the divine not being all-powerful, especially since we don't hear this idea articulated by most of today's, or any of today's dominant religions. Now, on the one hand, Kushner sounds almost like a religious skeptic when he writes things like, he says, although Western religions have long held the stance that God punishes the wicked and rewards the good, this belief just doesn't fit in with the facts. He writes that we know too much about the world today to believe that there's a God out there that always protects the innocent. He says that no one, for example, can believe that earthquakes and tsunamis are guided by a conscience that tells them which neighborhoods to destroy and which to preserve. And there's no one that can believe only the wicked went into the ovens of Auschwitz. But on the other hand, he combines this selective skepticism with his unwavering belief that there's really a God out there that created the universe, and what's more, that this creator is a personal God, one that cares about humans. So to reconcile his belief in God with his observations on all the suffering on earth, and particularly suffering of innocent victims like children, he lays out his argument for why God must not be almighty. And Kushner, in fact, uses God's whirlwind speech to make his case that running the universe is such a difficult job, even God doesn't have complete control. Now, I happen to think that the whirlwind speech is an odd passage for Kushner to choose to make this point. And I feel he has to use a bizarre interpretation of the text to justify his conclusion. But I'll get to my commentary a little later. First, I'm just going to lay out Kushner's argument. I'm going to start with a passage here from When Bad Things Happen to Good People. God answers Job out of the whirlwind, but God doesn't talk about Job's case at all, neither to detail Job's sins nor to explain his suffering. Instead, he says to Job, in effect, what do you know about how to run a world? I take God's line to mean, if you think that it's so easy to keep the world straight and true, to keep unfair things from happening to people, you try it. I'll get to my commentary a little later. All right, I'll continue on. Let me suggest that the author of the book of Job takes the position which neither Job nor his friends take. He believes in God's goodness and in Job's goodness and is prepared to give up his belief in the proposition that God is all-powerful. Bad things do happen to good people in this world, but it is not God who wills it. God would like people to get what they deserve in life, but he cannot always arrange it. Forced to choose between a good God who is not totally powerful or a powerful God who is not totally good, the author of the book of Job chooses to believe in God's goodness. Now, Kushner then uses God's speech in Job 41 about his battle with the sea serpent, Leviathan. And he writes this as evidence of the difficulty that God has in controlling evil. All right, this is again from Kushner. With great effort, God is able to catch the serpent in a net and pin him with fishhooks. But it is not easy. If the sea serpent is a symbol of chaos and evil, of all the uncontrollable things in the world, the author may be saying there too that even God has a hard time keeping chaos in check and limiting the damage that evil can do. So Kushner writes that rather than believing in an omnipotent God who sends diseases and then withholds miraculous cures, he chooses to believe in a God whose powers are limited, but whose love and concern is boundless, a God who's our source for courage and strength in the face of suffering. All right, I'll read one last quote here from When Bad Things Happen to Good People. If God is a God of justice and not of power, then he can still be on our side when bad things happen to us. Our misfortunes are none of his doing, so we can turn to him for help. Our question will not be Job's question, God, why are you doing this to me? But rather, God, see what is happening to me. Can you help me? We will turn to God not to be judged or forgiven, not to be rewarded or punished, but to be strengthened and comforted. I don't know why one person gets sick and another does not, but I cannot believe that God sends illness to a specific person for a specific reason. I don't believe in a God who has a weekly quota of malignant tumors to distribute and consults his computer to find out who deserves one most or who can handle it best. I don't believe that God causes mental retardation in children or chooses who should suffer from muscular dystrophy. The God I believe in does not send us the problem. He gives us the strength to cope with the problem. Now, I can understand why Kushner's approach has a certain appeal to it, because it makes God seem concerned and comforting and loving. And I can also see how Kushner had the incentive to come up with this kind of philosophy, as he was a rabbi that was leading as devout as life as possible. And then when his son was 3 years old, the boy was diagnosed with this rare, rapid aging disease that would cause him to never grow more than 3 feet in height and to look like a little old man while he was still a child, and then die in his early teens. And all these things happened, just as the doctors predicted. So Kushner obviously went through a lot of pain with that. And he felt like Job himself, in the sense that he was at least a relatively righteous man, at least compared to the more decadent people around him who had families that were completely healthy. And here this tragedy strikes him as a devout man, and strikes his 3-year-old boy, a boy certainly too young to have done any kind of wrong that would deserve this kind of sentence. And where's the suffering come from? Apparently nowhere but nature. And Kushner has this unwavering belief that God created nature, and he also has this unwavering belief that God is all good. So he had to come up with a philosophy that preserved his belief in the Creator and in this Creator's goodness. So the idea that the Creator is all-powerful is the idea that had to go. So again, I know that there are people who find this kind of philosophy comforting, and it keeps with maybe it helps with their pain. So around those people, I would probably just keep my mouth shut. But I doubt any of those people would be watching a video series with a title like the one I have. So I'm just going to keep on talking. And just note the obvious point that the practical benefit of being comforting, of course, does not make it true. So for those of us who are more interested in whether or not our beliefs are true than whether they're just comforting, what we really want to examine here is how well this belief can be reconciled with all our other knowledge and all our other observations. So when we look at the evidence, how well can it be reconciled with this idea that there's a God out there who is powerful enough to create the universe, but maybe just not control it all, and who's a personal God that loves us and wants the best for us, but doesn't quite have the power to manage it? And my own conclusion will be that this philosophy fails, and on several levels. I'm not going to be able to finish all my thoughts in this video, so to be continued in the next.
Are you strong enough to be my man?